From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melithopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. It's August in Oregon. It's hot, it's dry, but if you look closely, the pollinators are still coming to your garden. But maintaining that pollinator biodiversity and staying water-wise is a tricky business, so I thought this was a good opportunity to talk to somebody who has experience with these gardens in some place hotter and drier than here. So I reached out to Dr. Rosalyn Johnson, who runs a biodiverse garden consulting company called yardbio.com in the San Francisco Peninsula area. We met at the regional Be Audacious conference in the spring, where we heard about all sorts of challenges about creating biodiversity in the cities around pollinators, especially in an area that's experiencing rapid urbanization and also these fires and these hotter, drier summers. This episode is for you if you're looking out at your garden thinking, how can you create biodiversity in the city in the hot, dry month of August? Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, I am really pleased to welcome Dr. Johnson to Pollination.
Hi, Anthony. It's so nice to be here. This is Rosalyn Johnson. You can just call me Roz.
There's this growing movement towards biodiversity, increasing biodiversity in cities. And we had on a previous episode, Lincoln Best, who was talking about, at least in the city of Calgary, how they've set targets for increasing biodiversity. And I just want to begin by, why is building biodiversity in cities so important?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to try and answer it. Okay. I don't know if I can encompass the entire thought, but I'll give you what I've been thinking about it. I think that the preservation and parks movement in cities is well established, and that's complemented by people's gardening and their ability to develop a small habitat for themselves around their homes, kind of parcel by parcel. They are in a position to make a difference in the world from where they are, and their politics probably lead them to think more in terms of preservation of natural resources than just conservation. So it's not just about hunting in cities, it's also about biodiversity and the whole preservation thing. And so what I'm finding in San Francisco is that everybody's got their little parcel, and what I'm trying to do is convince them to take a part of their parcel and make it available to bees and wildlife.
It seems like a situation that, also applies here to Oregon. It seems like the San Francisco Peninsula area is experiencing extreme growth, and that it's coming up against areas that may have been natural. So can you briefly lay out the issues specific to the San Francisco Peninsula area when it comes to urban biodiversity? Tell us a little bit more on the ground, some of the kind of key issues that people are contending with.
One of the key issues is availability of native plants. If you're doing any kind of pollinator gardening, or for that matter, any kind of wildlife gardening, you're gardening for pollinators, for birds, for small mammals, just the whole mix of animals that can occur and tolerate people in an urban environment. So we've got everything from ravens and sparrows and blackbirds to pocket gophers, many different kinds of bees and butterflies.
I remember when I was down at the Be Audacious conference with you, I was really surprised that there is, at the same time that there is a shortage of native plants, there seems to be, at least in the San Francisco Peninsula area, also some great efforts to increase the availability. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Absolutely. One of the many hats I wear, this is a gig economy after all. and and even ecologists have to do different gigs. One of my gigs is that I'm on the board of directors for San Bruno Mountain Watch, which is a local environmental group that looks after the interests of San Bruno Mountain. And that is a huge natural area just south of the city. In fact, if you've flown into the San Francisco airport, when you're coming up into the city, there's a huge mountain range on the left, and that's San Bruno Mountain. Oh. And it is still a natural area. It's managed by the county of San Mateo, and it has the remnant populations, one of the most important remnant populations of natural land that's left on the San Francisco Peninsula. So it is the source for native plants for this region. One of the sources. I mean, you can get your plants from across the bay over at Annie's Annuals, which is great. But if you go to the Mission Blue Nursery, which is managed by San Bruno Mountain Watch, then you're getting plants that are actually sourced on the mountain itself. And they propagate them for restoration activities on the mountain. But the extra plants are used to sell to people for their gardens to raise money for further restoration efforts.
Oh, what a great great connection.
Yeah. And so I've been working with them and volunteering at the nursery so that I can learn all of the plants and their different growth stages and how to take care of them, so that I can install them in people's yards and make them grow there.
You've got this experience working in an extant remnant of native plants. And we were talking about gigs earlier, and I just wanted to ask you as well, one of the key things that, one of the reasons for inviting you on here is that you've got this experience advising homeowners on how to incorporate biodiversity into their urban spaces. Can you tell us how you managed to tackle this issue of bringing biodiversity into the city at the level of different property owners? Because I imagine people have a lot of different demands. They have a lot of expectations.
Well, it's been a really interesting ride so far with Yard Bio. I've been doing this for 2 years, and people have been open to the idea, but I have to be very clear with them that I'm an ecologist and a gardener. But I'm not a gardener like, the gardener that you hire for $20. I'm not a landscaper either. I don't put in irrigation, and I don't put in big infrastructure into a yard. What I'm trying to do is very focused with Yard Bio. I'm trying to increase pollinator and wildlife habitat in people's yards, not necessarily by changing the entire design, but by working with the existing infrastructure, the existing landscaping, and finding those pockets where I can put in some native plants that will help to diversify the plant community of the yard and provide pollen and nectar for pollinators to use. So part of my biggest challenge so far has been trying something new that I have to define to people, rather than going in and saying, hi, this is yardbio.com and I'm a landscaper. Then they know what to expect.
Yeah.
If I go in and say yardbio.com and I'm an ecologist and I want to help you diversify your backyard, they're like, oh, well, I didn't know I needed that. And so I tell them basically that if they want to help bees, they don't have to wait. They don't have to wait for the government to do it. They don't have to wait for anybody else to do it. They can help the populations that are already in the urban area survive better and propagate themselves just by planting native plants in their yards. It's made me much better at describing what it is that I can and cannot do for them.
So if I can just interrupt you for a second. So you've got so you have, I was thinking about expectations and but here you have a nice situation because you're taking somebody's, an urban space they're already living in and comfortable. And in some sense, it's kind of like a tweak. It's like thinking ecologically, thinking about, different pollinator plants suit different pollinators, and really thinking, okay, you need this, and this would fit in really here, and it'll look good. And it's kind of rather than a drastic, like, I'm going to take your backyard and scrape it, and we're going to start from scratch.
Right. Instead, it's more like oh, you have this old outfit. Let's see how we can spruce it up.
Oh, that's great.
For bees.
Uh-huh.
That's the idea. I think that's actually more viable than going to someone and saying, I want to take your entire yard over. and have my way with it. Mm-hmm. It's much more of a compromise between me and the homeowner of what they like that's out there now, and maybe they'd like to see more color at different seasons.
Oh yeah.
And I can find out if they need something that blooms pink in June, then put in Clarkia, which is a wonderful pink blooming annual plant that grows in this part of the world.
So, okay, you've got a bunch of, you have, I guess the next step is that for a lot of people, biodiversity, when it comes to bee biodiversity, I think we were talking at one of the breaks about how, most people's expectation are honeybees. When they think about bees and bees in trouble, they think about honeybees. And I imagine some of that education that goes with, bringing new plants in is in some sense training people to recognize. Because I imagine most people don't even know that a lot of these great bees that start to come in after you've introduced some of these plants are actually bees.
Right. They don't know. People are not very familiar with bees except, the bee on the Cheerios box, and maybe they've seen a honeybee on the packaging for the honey that they bring home. But very few people like you and me have looked at bees under the microscope and really had to sort out, the big fuzzy black and yellow ones from the little metallic green ones and the little metallic olive and brown ones. Most people, I think, are familiar more with honeybees. And I really appreciate you bringing this up, because honeybees are not what Yard Bio works with. I don't put hives in people's backyards. Mm-hmm. And that's a really important distinction, because there are companies that do. They think that,
really?
Helping bees means putting more hives out there. And there's some debate right now over whether putting out more honeybees does help native bees at all. I guess it only helps if you put in more habitat wherever you're putting in honeybees. But anyway, long story short, we have somewhere between, I think, 80 and 100 different bee species right around this part of the world, right around the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And so that's the pool of bees that I'm drawing from in San Francisco, the pool of bee species. And then whatever occurs here are those species that can best tolerate people and people's activities. So from that group of bees that remains here in the city, that's what I'm trying to provide habitat for. It's not the entire diversity of bees in California, or even the entire diversity of bees around the Bay Area. It's the bees that still occur in San Francisco and around the San Bruno Mountain area.
Well, fantastic. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and let's talk a little bit more about some of the plants that you like and some of the visitors that you see on those plants.
Okay, thanks, Anthony.
Okay, we're back. So, thinking about this gardening and for pollinators in the San Francisco Peninsula area, can you just tell us a little bit? It seems like it's like Oregon, but maybe even more severe. It's just hotter and drier in the summers. What are some of the strategies, and what are some of the plants that you like for kind of plugging into these landscapes so that you can, make it look good, but also keep those pollinators happy with lots of floral resources?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and I think I talked a little bit before about trying to introduce people to nature, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, part of nature is that California is dry and hot during the summer.
I suppose it is, eh?
and so, the way that we think about gardens is a very Eastern, I don't mean Far East, I mean very Eastern United States way of thinking.
Yeah.
Where there's thunderstorms all summer to keep the water in the garden, to keep your plants blooming and growing and looking good. And in California, since we have a rainy season during winter, the summer period is really a rest period for plants.
Yeah.
So they bloom after the rainy season is over, a lot of them, and then they rest. A lot of the plants rest during the summer.
Yeah.
And if you water them, you can actually decrease their lifespans because, you're asking them to kind of do double duty. That's not all of the plants, but some of them I'm thinking about. And so it's natural for California to have that hot, dry summer. It's mitigated in San Francisco by our fog. We get a fair amount of fog drip.
Uh-huh.
And so that can keep plants looking better and give them kind of a lifeline through the summer. But the summers are dry. We're not getting rain.
Yep.
But we do get fog, and that helps a lot. But the fog is changing over time. I mean, it's not, all I can say from my own personal experience is it's not as predictable as it used to be when I lived here 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about changes in the moisture levels that are being laid down over the summer.
So does this mean for a lot of the people who you work with is changing their expectations in terms of like having...
Yes, it's about changing expectations rather than trying to accommodate a year-round garden view. So I don't put in irrigation in people's yards.
Mm-hmm.
And I maintain a minimalist watering regime after the plants are established. I follow CalScape pretty closely. We have a wonderful resource from the California Native Plant Society that if you log into it, calscape.org, it'll tell you the plants that should grow at your address.
Oh, great.
Actually, which is
nice.
Amazing that you can just put in your address and you're like, okay, well, here's the 153 plants that grow here that are native to this area. And that's wonderful. But it goes further than that in telling you what the plants need in terms of minimal water and what they need for establishment water and what kinds of light conditions and soil conditions they like. So it's a really, really vital resource for this part of and all parts of California. It extends all over California.
Great. Well, we will link it on the show notes so that people have can look it up and use that tool. That sounds great.
Great.
Given this situation and given this context, what are some of your favorite pollinator plants for the San Francisco Peninsula?
One of my favorite plants is the California poppy, which is iconic in California, of course. I mean, it's our state flower. And it is, it's an annual, and it is just so easy to seed and so easy to grow. And it comes out with this beautiful orange poppy color. And if you keep a little bit of water on it all year round, it'll actually keep blooming.
Okay.
So it's a great plant to, that's easy to keep around, that feeds a lot of pollinators. I've seen green sweat bees use them and yellow-faced bumblebees as well.
I always enjoy a bumblebee in a poppy just kind of going around the rim, just chunking up
Yeah,
on
around
pollen.
and around and around. Yeah, loading up. I've never been able to find nectar in poppies. I wonder if there's anything there.
Oh, they don't.
Um,
It's because they are a pollen only source. They don't produce any nectar.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I see. I didn't know that there are flowers that don't have nectar at all.
There are a few of them, and the other one that I think of is lupins. There's like a couple of them that are just really prodigious pollen producers, but they don't produce much nectar. And I guess I would think about things like heathers as being one which they get nectar out of, but not pollen. I guess that's becomes a
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I guess but in terms of pollen, I totally agree. I think with California poppy, it's such an easy plant to grow, and it really does just shoot out pollen.
Yeah, yeah. And another favorite of mine is blue blossom ceanothus. It's a shrub
Yeah.
that grows here in huge hedges. I think Calscape says that the maximum dimensions for a plant are 30 by 30, 30 high, 30 wide. Feet.
It's and they're so majestic. It's just such great color.
Yeah, and the leaves maintain that beautiful shiny green over the course of the year, which is really amazing. And it's a great pollinator plant as well.
Well, and the one thing I would add here for Western Oregon is there's a really good guide. We'll put it in the show note that sort of evaluates different ceanothuses in Western Oregon, but for Eastern Oregon, unfortunately, it sounds like it's just a little too cold. You guys are in the prime ceanothus spot.
Can you guys grow blue-eyed grass up there?
Describe the plant to us.
It's a short plant, like 8 inches to a foot high. Grows in a bunch like a bunch grass, but it's an iris.
Oh.
And so it comes out with a blue flower with a yellow center. The flowers are about 3/4 of an inch across. Another favorite, coast buckwheat, comes up with kind of rosy white balls of flowers. I have seen a lot of bee activity on them, and I still am in the process of figuring out which bees those are. Again, it's the small bees, 1/4 of an inch or so, that are using the coast buckwheat.
But they also fill up. If they're like the wild buckwheats that we have in Eastern Oregon, they really do fill. They put a lot of color. They look great. They're really stunning.
Yeah, and we have different varieties that are brighter colors than the original natives. I think there are some cultivars of buckwheat that are like bright yellow and just much brighter colors. And I don't mind using cultivars as long as the flower shape doesn't impede bees getting into them.
Let's take another break, and then I'll come back. I have a set of questions I ask all my guests. I'm curious what your answers are going to be.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, we're back. Is there a book that you would like listeners to check out?
One of the books that I have found is a go-to book for relationships of bees to the kinds of plants that grow around the Bay Area is California Bees in Bloom, which is Gordon Franke, Robin Thorpe, Roland Colville, and Barbara Erter.
Yeah.
That book has been a really helpful book for me.
It's so good. It really does cover I like the curated plant lists. They really have done a lot of research. I wish we had something like that up here.
Well, there's your next project.
I don't think so. That's years of research into a book like that. It's a great book like that because it is really based on real observations in that part of California. Kind of really, kind of research. It's one thing that we've had guests on the past point out is that there are a lot of plant lists, but this is a really, reliable vetted plant list for California. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and the pictures are amazing. We were talking earlier about the diversity of bees, and you really get a sense from the pictures in this book of the variety, the amazing diversity of these animals. They're so different, and they're so beautiful. Every single species is just, lovely with its own coat of fur and its own patterns of color or
oh yeah, totally. I think it has the same, it's really good. The thing I love about that book is it does kind of give you, it tips the hat to some of the basic biology, and it gives you some sense of their natural history without overwhelming. They really thought carefully about laying that book out. I think it's really nicely done that way. It's sort of, if you're just curious, I imagine for some of your customers who are a little bit, more advanced, that's a book that they'd love to spend time. You can sit down and read it. It's not like a manual. Yeah, it's awesome that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And just a note on another one of my gigs, another one of my projects involves these pictures from Roland Johnson. I volunteered for a while on Alcatraz.
Oh.
And I was a water bird docent explaining to tourists the breeding of the different water birds on the island. But when I noticed that there were a lot of bees on Alcatraz, I asked them if they had done a survey.
Yeah.
And they had not. So I surveyed the bees on Alcatraz for 2017 to 2018 and put together a small collection for them.
Oh,
and
great.
They have decided that they're going to incorporate that collection into a display on native bees on Alcatraz that will be seen by all of those tourists that visit Alcatraz.
That's amazing.
For the prison.
Wow.
But they'll also see the gardens, and they'll also get a sample of the bees. And because bees in a collection don't look very impressive, we're also incorporating the pictures, a lot of which, the same photographer was the one who did California Bees in Bloom.
Is that right?
But he also has a Flickr account, and I've got permission to use those photos as well of some of the bee species that we collected.
Oh, fantastic!
So it's been a really great experience with the National Park Service, working with them to get a little bit more recognition for bees just out on Alcatraz, which is the most urban of islands.
What a great, that's such a great initiative. I'm so happy to hear about that.
Yeah.
Well, the next question I have is, do you have a go-to tool for doing the kind of work that you do with pollinators?
My go-to tool is a 1-inch plastic vial with a white plastic cap. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It's because butterfly nets can be unwieldy when you have to catch a bee. But if you have the right sized vial, you can sneak up on the bee, put it over the flower, and when the bee flies up into the vial, you just snap the cap on. You can take pictures of the bee. You can pass it around to a group of school children or a group of adults to get a look at what a wild bee looks like. And then you can let it go without harming it.
This might be the least expensive go-to tool on pollination, actually. I think you might have, you got it.
It certainly is a great educational tool. I use it with spiders as well. If I'm working with groups of school kids, I like to catch those big pumpkin spiders in the fall, the big orb weavers.
Uh-huh.
And you really don't want them just crawling around on kids. So you snap them in the vial and pass them around, let them go. Fantastic. That's how I started with that. But it works for bees too. And it's really great to be able to share them with kids without the kids risking getting a sting.
I think that's great. Well, it leads into the next question. If you were to have any pollinator in that vial, which one would you love to see? What's your favorite pollinator?
Well, I'll tell you, the biggest one I've ever gotten in is a carpenter bee. That's about the biggest bee that you can fit into a vial of this size. And believe it or not, after passing her around, and she was vibrating hard enough that when I passed the vial to another person, they could feel the bee inside the vial. When I let her out on a passion flower, and she didn't come after me. And I thought that was just the best example of how gentle these bees are. If they're not being threatened, then you can do quite a bit to them without risking a painful jab.
Well, and it is a bee that we love to see. Unfortunately, in Oregon, we're at the northern range, so I think north of Eugene you stop seeing them. But they are really magnificent, and just seeing those males just whiz around in circles is a sight to behold.
Yeah, that's one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate about carpenter bees, and really, they are one of my favorite bees, and it disappoints me that people consider them a pest.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people who see them coming in and out of holes in their decks wonder, when is the house going to come down from all these holes? But they don't realize that the holes are short and that the larvae are not actually eating wood. They're not like termites. They're just using a short tunnel into the wood as a place to make safe cells for larval bees to grow up. But those bees are provisioned with pollen and nectar, not with sawdust.
Yeah, right.
So they're not really as much of a threat. I have seen buildings leaning to one side, but that were full of carpenter bee holes. But I think that it was because they were derelict buildings, not because of anything that the bees had done.
Yeah, of course.
Well, so carpenter bees are a favorite.
That's a great bee. And, well, thank you so much for taking time to, out of the busy season, to talk with us a little bit about biodiversity and urban landscapes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. Show notes with information discussed in each episode can be found at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. We'd also love to hear from you, and there are several ways to connect. For one, you can visit our website to post an episode-specific comment, suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at pollinationpodcast@oregonstate.edu. Finally, you can tweet questions or comments or join our Facebook or Instagram communities. Just look us up at OSU Pollinator Health. If you like the show, consider letting iTunes know by leaving us a review or rating. It makes us more visible, which helps others discover pollination. See you next week.